I'm Paul Sullivan, your host of the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their parenting role. I know this from firsthand experience as the lead dad to my 3 girls, 3 dogs, 3 cats, and somewhat remarkably, 3 fish. I did this all while managing my career and striving to be an above average husband. One thing I know for sure about being a lead dad is it's not a normal role. You're not doing what dads have traditionally done, going to work and leaving the parenting to mom or someone else. Nor are you always welcome into the world where moms are the primary caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and focus on what really matters: family, friendship, finance, and fun. Today, my guest is Keegan Albaugh. Keegan is the executive director of Dad Guild, a nonprofit based in Burlington, Vermont. It's a group that has the second best logo in the dad space, after the Company of Dads, of course. Keegan started the organization in 2018. Its mission is to support and empower fathers by offering opportunities for connection, education, and community engagement. Recently, Keegan went from the volunteer president to the paid executive director, a real testament to the organization's growth. There's a funny line in his LinkedIn announcement that we can all identify with as dads. We've gone, it says, from a handful of dads meeting awkwardly at a local playground to a network of over 500 Vermont fathers of young children. Keegan, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast. How are you today?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me on here, Paul.
Yeah, good. Start off, first question. How'd you get into the dad biz?
How'd I get into the dad biz? You mean like actually becoming a dad, or like starting a dad?
We all know how that works. We've all had high school biology. We know how you actually become a dad. I mean, the actual dad biz. You have 2 kids. How did that lead to starting the Dad Guild?
Yeah, it all started out. My partner, she was participating in like a postpartum yoga group, and they had a support
and
group.
you try to get into the postpartum yoga group and they wouldn't let you in. Is that it?
As far as I know, like anyone can show up. I think I just I did not have a lot of leave from my work, so I was at work. But my partner was attending a group there, and they also had a just support group for new moms. And the yoga instructor offered like, hey, if anyone knows a dad who would want to facilitate a group for new dads, we'd love to have one. And my partner asked me, and I was like, yes, that sounds great. I will. I'm all about talking about like feelings, being vulnerable, and just like creating spaces for dads to get together. And yeah, so from there, I just like, I facilitated this group of like, I think it was 7 guys for like 6 months. And it was great because the first session, I asked everyone like, hey, why are you here? And like every dude was like, oh, because my wife made me. And I was like, oh no, this is not good. But then after 6 months, we met once a month. After 6 months, people were like, hey, I want to keep going. Like, what do we do? How do we keep this going? And that's when I was like, oh, this is something. Like, there needs to be more of this. So what do we do?
You just said, you're all about feelings. You're all about being vulnerable. 2 things always associated with men. Oh, wait, no, that's not true. 2 things not always associated with men. So what is it about sort of your background or your wiring or your DNA that allows you to put yourself out there like that and want to bring, other dads along?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of factors there. I think part of it is, I'm I was, fortunate where I had, a very loving family. My parents are fantastic people, still live in New Hampshire to this day, but just grew up in a very loving household. I watched a lot of TGIF and, shows like Full House and like, oh, like hug it out, that's what you do. And then from there, growing up, I got into the world of education and was really drawn to working with kids in particular and like teenagers, and just like really enjoyed conversations and kids opening up. So I just like kind of really fell in love with that work. And then, worked in nonprofits for the past like 15 to 20 years. And I think mostly I've just been really fortunate to have always been surrounded by a community of people who, have accepted me for who I am. And I haven't really felt too much of a need to like put up the mask or hide.
Yeah. When those first meetings that you had, those first 6 months with those dads that came out of the yoga group, was that did you immediately form the dad guild, or did that come later on when you realized there was more of a critical mass, or you saw other things that might be needed in your state?
Yeah, that came later on. I think, after we had, and I forget, sorry, it was 9 months. It was 9 months long. After we had that group meet, when people were asking like, "Hey, how did we want to keep this going?" And I, recognized that, gosh, there really isn't a strong fatherhood community in Burlington, Vermont, or in Vermont overall. And so at that point, I sent an email out to like all the dads of young kids that I knew. So there's like 3 dozen dads, and I was like, "Hey, the next 3 Tuesdays, I'm going to be down at the Skinny Pancake in Burlington, and come for a drink, get some fries, and I want to pick everyone's brains." Like, so I came with like some questions for folks of like, "Hey, as you've been a dad, like, what have you seen as far as community? Where do you go for support? What would you like to see? What ideas do you have?" And just kind of like really picked people's brains over the course of 3 weeks for whoever could show up. And then from there got like a pretty clear like, oh, like there seems to be consensus around like guys looking to do fun things with each other and with
Yeah.
their kids. And so where do we go from there? And then that's when I sat down with one of our founding board members to kind of be like, "Hey, like, let's research what's out there, and let's kind of like see what models are what we're trying to achieve, and let's just go for it."
Yeah. Well, in those early meetings, obviously getting together, you'd say French fries and a beer. That's pretty, it's a good way to get people to come down. But what was the feedback? What were these dads at all different stages, or what did you find that they craved the most, or at least they told you they craved the most?
Yeah, I think most of the guys that I had invited were just like people in my social network. So there are people who, I would say, all the kids were like ages 3 and younger. So it's all guys who were like pretty much in it. Um, and I would say like the answers that I got from folks, there was a lot of excitement around like events for dads, like things to do for not like dads themselves and also dads with their kids. And so there definitely seemed to be a lot of interest around like, "Hey, yeah, there's not really any groups or things going on. I would love like events to take my kid to like be around other dads."
Yeah.
Guys, I don't think guys were coming out and being like, "Oh, I really want more dad friends," like that. We didn't quite get there, but like, I think there's some underlying messages there that, folks may not be saying, but I think I hear what they're really saying.
Yeah. When you thought about, some of those early events that you had that came out of that meeting, what were the ones that were the most successful, either by attendance or probably more tellingly by feedback afterwards?
Yeah, I think like the ones that were the most successful early on, because like as you mentioned earlier in introduction, like, we've been volunteer run for, gosh, over 3 years. And like, I just stepped into a 10-hour a week director position in January of this year. So it's been really like, we don't have any money. We don't really, we're not advertising. It's like, how do we do this? And so it's a lot of like social media marketing and just kind of like making some flyers and posting them up. I would say early on, um, some like playground play groups, like those, early on, you'd have like, a few, even if like a few guys showed up at the same time to the same playground, like that was pretty successful. And then our dad's night out events, that was one that like, I think early on we were doing like, we play like retro video games at a local brewery, and like, you might have like, 10 guys show up.
Mhm.
And it was so rad because you'd have like 10 guys show up, and under the safety of playing beer and or drinking beer and playing video games,
Right.
when in reality they get there and yes, they're doing those things, but then you see like, a circle of 3 guys talking about sleep struggles. You see like a circle of 3 guys talking about how work's been really challenging lately, and you're like, "Okay, cool, like you came here, and now you're talking about other stuff, like
Yep.
this is awesome."
Was there a certain point where you laid a structure onto what Dad Guild was trying to do, or did you just have you left it, free form, just as a way to sort of convene, dads throughout Vermont and let them come together, whether, as you said, they want to drink some beer and play video games, or they want to talk, more seriously about things they could sure they're struggling with or they need to learn about as dads.
I think that things have been kind of coming up and being created pretty organically. I think I think early on we were kind of like, "Hey, let's just start putting some events together and see what appeals to people." And then, as we became a nonprofit organization and we have a board, then we really started to kind of be a bit more strategic, kind of like, hey, like, what is our overall vision here? What are some of our, like, what's some of our goals for our 3-year plan? And kind of coming up with some more specific, a more specific strategy for what we were trying to accomplish, and then making sure what programs and activities that we're planning were in alignment with those pieces. And then the other piece I was going to say is that kind of recognizing, since we are, we're really this small grassroots community organization, is you kind of start to see like, okay, the guys who are showing up, like, what are you hearing? What are people looking for? And then, for example, like we intentionally didn't create a like a community peer support group like that where you're just kind of sitting around and talking right away, recognizing like, hey, like maybe we're not quite there yet. But as we started to notice more and more dads kind of advocate for that, or you'd hear them sharing things that you're like, wow, you really need this other kind of space, that we got to a point where, we've created like a really intentional like peer support campfire group that meets once a month and really like has way more intentional structure around sharing and being vulnerable.
Yeah. In one of my early podcasts, I talked to a fellow named Brad Klontz, who's a lead dad, what I call lead dad. He's also a financial psychologist. And he talks about the power of role models for men, for fathers. And, in his own life, when he was living in Hawaii, which would sound pretty sweet to me, being a psychologist, there weren't a lot of role models. It's a very traditional culture he found where, women did certain things and men did other things. Now he lives in Boulder, Colorado, and there are dads everywhere, out with their kids. And he feels like it's a much better place to be, to sort of, be out there as the primary parent. I mean, that's what the company of dads is trying to do. We're trying to normalize men being the primary parent. Did you find, with the meetings you were having when you're bringing people together with the Dad Guild, that you were serving as sort of, role models for each other, and that those guys who are coming week after week, that they almost served as sort of evangelists for the dad cause in Vermont?
Oh yeah, I would. It's it's so funny, like, because I think there's a lot of dads out there who I think are like, they're doing the stuff. They're parenting, they're doing the work-life balance, they're with their partner, but there's not, historically there hasn't been a lot of community or like groups for those individuals. And so, but we see a lot of that with mothers or people who give birth, that you see it's in your face a lot more. And what I have found is that it's so interesting when you get like 5 guys together pushing strollers through a park and like talking, like people stop dead in their tracks and they turn and they're like, what's going on? And you're like, wow, like but like that's the work, that's when you start recognizing like, hey, like what are we doing when we create, when we're doing a Dad Guild event? It's not just creating a space for men to come together and talk. When you have 5 guys like wearing babies, walking through a park, and people are stopping and turning and asking so many questions. It's like,
or do they get nervous? Are you like the Hells Angels of Burlington, Vermont, like with those strollers?
That's exactly the identity we're going for. Dad Guild, the Hells Angels of Vermont. No, I get super excited because I'm just like, I think it's so. At first, I would find it really interesting that people were noticing that they were like, that it's like, whoa, this is so weird and unusual that I have to go to this. I have to go comment and I have to like make sure, is there something going on that I didn't know about? And at first I was like, I get kind of annoyed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is why we're doing this. But then like after a while, you're like, oh, this is why we're doing this, and like there is such a value for people to like that modeling piece you said, that when you're walking around, engaging with your kids, for people to see that and be like, oh, like that's really awesome.
Now, any moms who are listening to this will be furious, because this is kind of a further testament to just how low the bar is for a dad. You're like, he's pushing the stroller. He's carrying his own child in a baby bjorn, like, and he gets credit for that.
Oh yeah, dude, the bar is so low. It's ridiculous. And it's like, I'm a columnist for a newspaper up here in Vermont, for Kids Vermont. And like, I wrote a piece about that a while ago around how low the bar is for men. And you're totally right. Where like for mothers, like I could see where it's really infuriating, where it's like, yeah, hey guys pushing a kid through the park, and everyone's like, wow, good job. And you're like, this is ridiculous. Why are
He didn't fall out of the stroller. You knew how to put the straps on. That is amazing.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot at Dadgill, where it's just like, and the reality is like that people are giving that kind of reaction, and that's where we are, and that our work, part of our work, is to like uh to get to a point where it's people don't feel the need to comment, where it can just be like, oh yeah, that person's just doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like that person's a human being taking care of another human being. Like
Right.
that's not, you shouldn't be applauded for that, like, or treated any differently.
So, I agree 100% with you that the bar is so low for sort of dads in the wild like that. But on the flip side, I think that the bar can be quite high. And so one of the things I'm trying to do with the company of dads is to create a community for lead dads, men who work full-time, part-time, or devote themselves entirely to their kids, but are essentially the primary parent. And, when I was thinking about this over the past couple of years, every other type of parent has a community. If you're a typical go to work dad, you get up in the morning, get in your car, get on the train, go to work. You've got your community, lunch, beer, whatever. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you have the sort of community within your community, house of worship, school, hobbies, etc. Working moms have a group. They're quite busy and they can get together and be together. But men who identify as the primary parent, men who are what I call lead dads, they lack that community. They lack that, and some of it is, when you were saying about, made me think about it, like, let's play, Pong and drink, an IPA. And it took a while for the guys to warm up and start talking about the underlying issues. I see it where I am, in Southern Connecticut with, men who've come up to me and said, I want to be part of your group, but don't say that I do this. These are guys who are scholars, doing whatever. I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
That means you have a more flexible schedule than your wife, and therefore you could be with your son or daughter, and that's a good thing. How do you think we go about, normalizing the role so that, a lead dad in Southern Connecticut can just do what he's doing, and a dad with a stroller in Vermont isn't pulled over and given a ticket to make sure the baby is properly strapped in? How do we normalize these roles that we've taken on?
It takes time, man. It takes time. Like,
But it's
I think,
2022. It's not 1922. It's 2022.
yeah, we've come so far in the past like few decades, I think, and there's still like so much work to do. And I think that like, when our work here at Dad Guild, it's very like long term. I'm thinking about, what are we modeling for our kids, that like, we're kids, these dads who are going to these play groups regularly, and you have this generation of children within this community who are now seeing dads as like, oh, they're the ones who are bringing all the kids to the play group and bringing the hot chocolate and like talking about stuff like that. my 5-year-old, every weekend she'll be like, hey, is there a Dad Guild play group? And I'm like, that's so cool that for you, this is the status quo, is like dads hanging out and playing together. That's
or that your 5-year-old has friends as well through Dad Guild. So your 5-year-old wants to go because it's not boring. You're not dragging, along.
Yeah, exactly. It's so cool. And I think that like it just takes a lot of time, because I think like one, there's this, I think there's a couple things that play here, where one, there's this piece around like, dads being engaged. And I think that like for a lot of guys, there's still some discomfort of like, going to a play group or going into like anything involving parenting and showing up as a dad. Cause I think it can feel pretty uncomfortable for folks. I think it takes a certain breed of guy to be like, I'm not really going to step into this position. Like, and then there's this other piece too, I think, are just around men in general, where there's such this like lone wolf mentality, and that like, men, their social circles are typically way smaller. They're, not talking to people about things. And, you see that in men's physical and mental health, and how it like, it's a big concern. And like the suicide rates of men, we're conditioned to not talk to other people and to not open up. And so I think that's another piece that like just takes a long time of modeling, and like, hey, not only is this like safe, but it's also cool, it's fun. your partner is really going to like it if you're going and doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It just takes a long time.
I mean, there's one thing getting, men comfortable being in dad guild or identifying as lead dads with the company of dads and getting together as men. But I mean, have you tried to broker any peace with like the Mom Mafia up in Vermont? Like, like extended olive branch? Like I mean, how do you get it so that it isn't the strangest thing on a playground when moms see dads, 5 dads at strollers and say, holy shit, what's going on there? We got to go make sure those kids are okay. Like, how do we normalize that so that you're just all parents together and some of you happen to be moms and some of you happen to be dads?
Yeah, and like, oh man, there's a few things I wanted to address in there that you just said. One, just immediately that piece you said around like, how are we creating a community where it doesn't matter who you are, that you're just, you're a caregiver and you can step onto like any playground and everyone can be comfortable with each other. And that's just really beautiful goal of like, how do we get to that point in society where it doesn't matter who you are? And so I think, that's part of our work in the conversations that we're having is like, one, like we're specifically targeting dads and those who, non-birth partners, those who identify as fathers, specifically targeting that group of folks because they have not been engaged in this role for a very, very, very long time. That being said, it's really important that we're also working with different community partners and having conversations to ensure that like, hey, how are we ensuring that no matter how a caregiver identifies that they're also, getting the same benefits as a dad and dad guild or a mother in some, parenting group? How are we ensuring that like we're not widening any gaps and that no one is being left behind? And how are we really using this identity as a caregiver to build bridges and create connections? Because when you have a kid and someone else has a kid, there's so much you just get regardless of anything else that going on in that person's life. You're like, I get it.
Yeah.
So there's that piece. And then gosh, I'm trying to remember the other part of so the other piece you were mentioning about have you extended an olive branch to any of the mom groups? When we started Dad Guild, one of our first steps of action was like reaching out to every community partner and just being like, hey, do you want to meet? And just like talking and kind of sharing, one, developing a better understanding of like, hey, what is going on in terms of parenting support and in terms of how we're engaging dads. Tell me more and tell me about the work that you're doing. And also, here's what we're trying to do. And let's make some connections. And overwhelmingly, like all of our community partners have been so jazzed about the work that we're doing and the perspective that we're bringing. Because, we're not like, hey, we just dads need attention. And like, we just want to go and have beer and like hang out and stuff and get out of the house more. It's like, that's not what we're doing. Like, we're addressing.
But to be clear here, there is beer involved, right?
To be clear, sometimes we're pretty intentional about like, some events have alcohol present, some don't. If there is alcohol present, the event is not circled around it. There's something else that people can engage in, just considering things like substance use and addiction. But talking with just these other community partners and particularly like mom communities around, hey, how can we work together? Because like I think what I was mentioning is that like, yes, we're addressing like the mental health and well-being of men. We're exploring like we're addressing how kids are better off when dads are engaged and involved. And a big part of our work is addressing gender equity in parenting. You talk about how many people who give birth take time off from work after to take care of a child and how that affects that things like the wage gap in our country. And so when we're engaging more men and doing that work, how are we having an impact on that kind of stuff? And so I think when community partners and moms groups, hear that piece of the work and develop a better understanding of like, what are we actually really trying to accomplish? This isn't just dudes getting together. This is much bigger than that. And then it's pretty quick to like, whoa, like that's awesome. We want to partner up and support that.
Plus, when we read all of this research and see all this data on the second shift, on, moms coming home from work and still feeling like they have to do so much of the household stuff, so much of the family stuff, so much of the kid stuff. The only way that gets reduced is if, fathers embrace the fact that they can do stuff. I have this video that I did a couple of days ago that's complete tongue-in-cheek nonsense, but it's sort of, lead dad talking to bro dad. And the whole concept is around folding the laundry. And like the lead dad is like, you could fold the laundry and watch Sports Center at the same time. And the other guy's like, I don't know, why would I fold laundry? I don't understand. Like it's these little things that if we get men that advances slowly, sort of gender equity, it advances slowly this, notion that both both partners can fulfill their own potential, whether, the man is a primary parent or the mom is. And that's something, I mean, I work toward it. Is that something that, you've been working toward over the past couple of years?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think, one, there's the recognition that like every family's different and that like, people, my goal isn't per se to like, oh, in every household that like everything's fully balanced, but just trusting that like people are at least having the conversations and exploring like, because some folks might be working full time while someone's at home, and that depends on how flexible one's job is or what they're getting paid, and that like just ultimately folks are having conversations and that they have choices into how they're running their family and how things are divided. Because I definitely used to keep score myself, like, well, I cleaned, I cooked this week and I did the dishes and I vacuumed, and like right now it's like 3-1. Like what the heck? And like that's
I bet that went over really well. I bet that your scorekeeping was really appreciated.
yeah, it was I slept on the couch a lot. But it's like it's taken a long time to be like, hey man, like that, don't do that. Don't do that. And like have conversations about, how you are divvying things up, and really just what do you need and how can you offer support. But that piece, I'm writing a grant application right now, and like one of the pieces that we're highlighting is that piece around like the unpaid labor of women at the home, and in terms of like childcare responsibilities. And I forget the exact numbers, but like it's pretty significant. And then there's amazing research out there too that shows like actually when there is a dad present, like the woman's workload actually like increases as well. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like this is so startling. And so I think that piece around like, one, we're creating this community of dads, and so we're making it cool, we're making it fun. It's like it's becoming like the thing to do if you live in this area. But then you start kind of like introducing these things like, hey, let's do a book group around this. Like, hey, on our social media, let's put some of these posts addressing the unfair balance of like unpaid labor that mothers take on. And so I think that like now that you have a community and you have a following, as men, to kind of be like, hey men, like this is important, and I make sure you're talking about this with your partner and your family. Because then I hope we get to a point where like, because there's a lot of guys who are reluctant to like really participate in dad guild. That's like that is so that really intrigues me. But like when you get to a point where like there's a lot of moms putting pressure on the dads, like, hey, you should go be a part of this. So I'm hoping you get to a point where like if dad is like not engaging, it's like, dude, you kind of just look like a little bit of a jerk, like
a bit of a slacker. You're kind of slacking off, like just go.
Yeah, yeah, your partner's like seeing this and telling you to do it, and you're still saying no. And like hey, you're saying no, and these guys are talking about like being better partners and spouses and doing more around the house, and like you don't want to go to that, why not? Like, so my hope's like that continues to be some pressure.
When you've had, sort of converts, when you've had dads who were reluctant to go to dad guild, then you got them to go and got them to come, and then they've stayed on. When they reflect back on their reluctance and then talk about sort of, almost their conversion to being part of dad guild, what was it? What do they say? What stands out to them?
Yeah, the two things that stick out to me, one, social anxiety. We did a survey asking people, like we do an annual survey, and last year we did one just kind of be like, hey, if you're not coming out, why aren't you coming? And a quarter of respondents said social anxiety was like the thing holding them back. And then in talking, and it's just like it's awkward as an adult to be like, hey, go to this event where there's a bunch of other dads just hanging around, talking or doing something, and you may not know anyone, but you should go. And it's like that's even for anyone, not just dads, like that produces a lot of anxiety as an adult in the world. But I think the biggest thing that always is consistently said and stands out is that guys, they didn't know something like this existed, and they didn't know that they wanted it, and they didn't know that they needed it. And so this piece around, guys, unless it's like in their face and they're seeing it a lot, guys they're not having a kid and they're not going home and like Googling dad group. They're not like, oh, I really want to connect with a bunch of dads. They're more just like, all right, I have a kid now, and like, I'm a man and I'm a dad, and we don't get together and talk about how we're doing, and like, we don't make up hot cocoa in a big group and, go to the playground together with sleds. Like that's just not something that I've been exposed to.
Right.
And when guys come and they participate and they start talking and they come back and they're like, wow, like I had this like kind of hole in my life that I wasn't really aware of. And then once I became a part of this community, it was like, oh, like that was the hole, was this like this community and connection to other men and other dads. And so that piece, and that gets really interesting. It's like, how do you sell, or not we're selling, but like, how do you introduce something to someone when like they just have no idea what it is? It's just such a foreign concept to them.
Yeah. That's it. Community connection. I love it. Keegan, thank you for being my guest today on the Company of Dads podcast. I always give the last word to the guest. And so tell me, I mean, what's your goal? What do you want to make sure we know about Dad Guild? But, you grew up from 0 to 500. You've taken over the playground. You're swamping it with all those strollers. Nobody messes with Dad Guild anymore. But what's your goal going forward for Dad Guild in Vermont and beyond?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Paul. And I would say like, yeah, I mean, at this point, we just need to grow our capacity. Like I said, I work 10 hours a week. I probably spend closer like, 15 to 20, but the list is so long of the stuff that we want to accomplish. We've had some conversations with folks at the state level around like, hey, creating a statewide fatherhood network, to be ensuring that there's really no father in the state of Vermont who's, missing out and has an opportunity to be a part of our community and to provide more resources for folks. So I'd say anyone who's interested can go to dadguild.org and learn a bit more. And if any of our listeners are like billionaire philanthropists who are looking to invest in fatherhood in the Green Mountain State, then please reach out, because that's what we need right now.
Perfect way to end. Thank you again, Keegan.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure.